Today, we'll be discussing sovereignty against the odds, power in the age of white supremacy. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, European colonial powers expanded their domain across vast regions of Asia and Africa, employing ideologies of racism and eugenics to justify their imperial ambitions. These doctrines posited the superiority of certain races over others, providing a pseudo-scientific rationale for the subjugation and exploitation of non-European peoples. While the Americas, North and South, Australia and New Zealand had already fallen under European control through settler colonies and systems of African slavery, the late 19th century saw intensified efforts to colonize the remaining independent regions of Asia and Africa. In other words, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the English, the French had colonized the Americas, North and South, but those countries would become overwhelmingly independent by the 19th century. There was a second wave of colonialism. This period is often referred to as the scramble for Africa and the expansion into Asia. It was marked by aggressive territorial acquisitions driven by economic interests, strategic consideration, and a belief in the civilizing missions purported by social Darwinists. However, not all nations succumbed to these imperial pressures. Some mounted significant resistance and pursued unique paths towards modernization and self-determination. This video essay explores the experiences of Hawaii, Japan, Liberia, and Ethiopia, exploring how each navigated the challenges posed by colonial hierarchies and the ideologies that underpinned them.
Hi, you're in class with Dr. T.
The Kingdom of Hawaii under King Kamehameha III implemented progressive policies that promoted education and enfranchised citizens irrespective of race, reflecting a commitment to multiculturalism and equality. In 1840, Kamehameha III established a constitutional monarchy, introducing the first Hawaiian language constitution, which laid the foundation for a legal system that protected the rights of all citizens. The government prioritized public education, leading to the creation of a comprehensive school system accessible to all residents. By 1893, Hawaii achieved a literacy rate that was nearly universal among its population, underscoring its dedication to education as a cornerstone of national development. Despite these advancements, Hawaii's strategic location in the Pacific rendered it vulnerable to foreign interests, particularly those of the United States. American expansionist ideologies, coupled with racial prejudice that viewed non-Western government as inferior, led to the orchestration of the overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani in 1893. The subsequent annexation of Hawaii in 1898 marked the end of its sovereignty and the progressive governance. This subjugation illustrates how external imperial pressures motivated for both strategic interests and racial ideologies could undermine the autonomy of non-European nations despite their internal advancements. Another example is Japan. Japan emulated and transformed itself into an imperial power. Japan's response to Western imperialism involved a deliberate emulation of Western political, economic, and military systems during the Meiji Restoration. They adopted several key structures. They sought to resist the racial hierarchies imposed by Western powers and assert its position as a modern nation state. The Meiji government implemented sweeping reforms. There were political reforms. For example, the feudal system was dismantled and a centralized government was established, drawing inspiration from other Western political structures. Also, there were economic reforms. The government invested in infrastructure such as railroads and telegraph lines and promoted industrialization by establishing state-owned factories and encouraging private enterprise. Finally, there were military reforms. They had a conscripted army modeled after Western forces, and modern weaponry was adopted, significantly strengthening Japan's military's capabilities. These reforms transformed Japan into a formidable military power, culminating in its victory over Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, which took place approximately 1904 to 1905. The conflict arose from rival imperial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea. Japan's surprise attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur initiated hostilities, leading to significant battles, such as the siege of Port Arthur and the Battle of Tsushima. Japan's decisive victory not only shattered Western perceptions of racial superiority, but also positioned Japan as a major imperial power. Subsequently, Japan pursued its own colonial ambitions, annexing territories such as Korea and Taiwan, thereby mirroring the imperialistic behaviors of the Western nations it once resisted. Inverting Eurocentric logic, Japan began to view itself as the leading Asian power, adopting a sense of racial superiority over its neighbors. This perspective was evident in its colonial administration, where Japanese authorities implemented policies that marginalized local cultures and promoted assimilation into Japanese norms. Non-European observers, particularly, for example, African Americans, viewed Japan's rise with a mix of admiration and complex reflection. The Japanese victory over Russia was seen by many African Americans as a symbolic challenge to global white supremacy, inspiring hope for racial equality and self-determination. Another case is Liberia. Liberia, in many ways, would reproduce many of the racial hierarchies that existed in that time. Liberia was established by the American Colonization Society as a settlement for freed African Americans. Liberia declared its independence in 1847. The Americo-Liberian settlers, influenced by the racial ideologies prevalent in the United States, instituted a governance system that marginalized indigenous African populations. They, the African Americans, dominated political and economic spheres, leading to the exploitation and disfranchisement of the native communities that had already lived in what is now Liberia. For example, the settlers implemented policies that restricted indigenous peoples' access to political participation and economic opportunities, while the African American or Americo-Liberians lived in well-planned towns with Western-style houses and amenities. Indigenous populations often remained in rural areas with limited access to education, healthcare, and infrastructure. This replication of racial hierarchies hindered national cohesion and development, as the exclusion of the majority indigenous population from meaningful participation in governance, and the economy fostered enduring social stratification and impeded collective progress. The Americo-Liberian minority's grip on power persisted for over a century, leading to tensions that eventually accumulated in political upheaval and a civil war. Liberia remains problematic as far as its economy is concerned due to this division until this day. Ethiopia's remarkable victory over Italy at the Battle of Adwa in 1896 not only preserved its sovereignty, but also served as a powerful symbol of African resistance against European colonialism. This triumph directly challenged prevailing European racial ideologies that underestimated African military capabilities. Despite this success, Ethiopia faced significant internal challenges that hindered its modernization efforts. The Ethiopian elite engaged in extensive debates regarding the nation's development trajectory. Figures such as Gabri Wat advocated for comprehensive reforms emphasizing the need for industrialization, improving public administration, and integration into the global economy. Gibriwat, educated in Germany, returned with insights that he believed could propel Ethiopia towards modernization. He argued that without adopting certain Western practices, Ethiopia risks falling behind. However, his untimely death in 1919 curtailed his reformative initiatives. Conversely, some members of the nobility and clergy were cautious about rapid modernization, fearing it might erode traditional power structures and cultural values. This tension between progressive and conservative factions created a complex environment for implementing reforms. Externally, European powers imposed limitations on Ethiopia's progress as well. Following the Battle of Adwa, while European nations officially recognized Ethiopia's independence, they remained wary of its growing influence. For instance, Ethiopia's admission to the League of Nations in 1923 was met with resistance, and once admitted, the nation faced restrictions on arms imports, hindering its ability to modernize its military. Additionally, economic pressures and diplomatic isolation were tactics employed to limit Ethiopia's development, reflecting a broader pattern of European powers attempting to maintain influence over African nations. In conclusion, the experiences of Hawaii, Japan, Liberia, and Ethiopia underscore the profound impact of racist and eugenic ideologies on colonial and anti-colonial endeavors. These nations adopted diverse strategies, ranging from progressive governance and emulation of Western models to the reproduction of racial hierarchies and military resistance to navigate the oppressive frameworks imposed by colonial powers. While some approaches facilitated national development and challenged imperial narratives, others inadvertently reinforced the very hierarchies they sought to dismantle. A critical lesson from these histories is the importance of formulating resistance strategies that not only challenge external domination, but also promote internal cohesion and equitable development. Non-European nations' efforts to reject colonial mentalities highlight the necessity of balancing modernization with the preservation of cultural identity, ensuring that progress does not come at the expense of societal fragmentation or the perpetuation of oppressive structures. Thank you. Please share, please like, and smash that bell. And not to mention, please subscribe to my channel. Take care.